We now return to the second stage debate of the Hunting of Wild Mammals Bill, and I call Harry Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The private member's bill before us today represents without doubt an attempt to address what is a very emotive issue for many. I am sure that, like me, members across the chamber have been dealing with a huge amount of mail and have been engaging with constituents from both sides of the debate. Since the bill was first drafted, at the outset, I would say personally that I very much sympathise with the intent of the bill. I am not a hunting man, and the activity has never appealed to me in any shape or form, especially in terms of it being for entertainment purposes. That said, however, I know many for whom it does, and I also know the benefits that flow from the activity, both for those involved and also for our rural communities more widely. It is no secret, for instance, whether we as individuals like it or not, that the hunting of mammals using dogs has been a method of pest control employed by farmers for centuries. The Ulster Farmers Union and other organisations have drawn attention to that fact that the fox population requires constant management due to the danger they present to the domestic poultry flocks and lambs especially. The member for South Antrim has raised alternative methods for fox control, such as fox-proof fencing, ultrasonic pest devices, or artificial scents which deter foxes. These are likely to be considered impractical by farmers in Northern Ireland, and various representations have already been made to me by those within the sector on this point. In any event, it could be assumed that landowners would be seeking government support for the funding of alternative methods for fox management should the bill be enacted. It is perhaps worth bearing in mind that hunting with hounds is not seen as a major activity in Northern Ireland. There are relatively small numbers of hunt groups who operate within NI, and those engaged in the activity usually have long-held family connections with it. Hunts are currently regulated both by the few registered bodies who conduct them, but also by external factors. For example, hunts only gain access to farmland with the consent of individual farmers and landowners. This means that landowners are able to decide their own position on the hunt and its place in the countryside and regulate usage accordingly. Many will be aware that the Ulster Farmers Union has a long-standing memorandum of understanding with the Countryside Alliance and the Northern Ireland Masters of the Hounds Association, meaning problems can be raised by landowners and rectified quickly through legitimate bodies. Opponents of the bill argue that it raises more questions than answers. It will be for the member, working in conjunction with the committee, to seek to address some of the practicalities that will be faced by the rural community. Attempts have been made within this bill to close several of the loopholes which have been evidenced in England and Wales since similar legislation was enacted some 15 years ago, which is to be welcomed. However, even with the inclusion of a ban on trail hunting, it is difficult to see how future breaches could be identified and addressed. Similarly, issues with the scope of the proposed legislation have also been highlighted. I note that the members previously pointed to the threshold of organised use for human entertainment as being an effective tool in limiting the scope of the bill and ensuring it doesn't become so encompassing as to include the one man and his dogs of the lead analogy. I remain to be convinced as to the viability of the legal practicalities of this point, however. I know that many within our rural communities have serious concerns about any future impact the bill could have on other countryside activities, including shooting and pest control, for instance. Issues have been raised in relation to the efficiency of the consultation process, and I have to acknowledge my own concerns with the process and the results received. I appreciate that the consultation was conducted in accordance with the usual Assembly procedures, but I feel the lack of data from respondents has severely weakened the consultation. I firmly believe that this is an issue that the Assembly needs to consider more widely. The potential for consultations to be manipulated by lobby groups from elsewhere around the world due to the lack of data supplied by respondents in terms of their address, for example, is something that I believe we need to close down moving forward. The motives behind the bill can be understood. However, little detail has been supplied in terms of the benefits, or more importantly, the facts which the legislation will likely create for those standing to be most affected. For example, in terms of jobs lost for gamekeepers or those responsible for the breeding and training of dogs, it should also be noted that it is not just DERA who may have a role in this legislation. Input from the Department of Justice, including the PSNI, and also the Department for Communities, will likely be required if a workable piece of legislation is to be achieved. Pressures will undoubtedly be placed upon police resources to enforce future legislation in this area when considered against other priorities such as rural crime, and I would urge members to bear enforcement issues in mind during their deliberations. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I hope to engage constructively with the bill when it reaches committee and will be happy to do so. However, I will not be supporting the bill before us today. That said, I acknowledge the genuine intent of the member, and on a personal level, I wish him well on his endeavours. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.